Hi, this is Jack Duvall, CEO of Bantam Incorporated, a private investment office serving attorneys out of New York. Today's video is entitled The Four Banksmen of the Apocalypse, and it is accompanied by a blog post and a podcast of the same name. So feel free to check it out in whatever format that you like to consume your Bantam content. So today's video is on a problem that I see in the global economy, which is that four of the biggest banks in the world are experiencing extreme duress. And there's an old adage in the markets that, the markets can't advance without the participation of the financial sector. Now, that's been put to the test over the past year, especially since the coronavirus, because the banks have gotten crushed, and certainly at least technology stocks have advanced, and the broader market, which of course is heavily weighted to those stocks, has also advanced. So those four banks are HSBC, which is technically based in London, but is basically an Asian focused entity. Deutsche Bank, of course, in Germany, StandardChartered, also in the emerging markets, and Citgroup in the US. Now, I'll give you an amazing statistic. Those four names have declined by 76%, 90%, 77%, and 85% respectively since the end of 2007. It's just remarkable. Now, the banks have been in the news lately, a few weeks ago, because there was a leak that all the banks, not just those four, but all the big banks globally, had filed over $2 trillion worth of suspicious activity reports called SARs or SARs. Now, each and every suspicious activity report that, of course, gets reported to the government is not necessarily proof of fraud or money laundering or other bad actions. But a lot of it is. A lot of it is dirty money. It comes out of narco states and other kind of failed governments. And also there's terrorist money in there, money laundering, drug money, you name it. So a lot of that is bad money. And the banks sold off on that, of course. But the real story is actually not that. What's behind this dramatic decline in these bank stocks, and by the way, the ones that haven't declined that dramatically as these, 76 to 90%. Most of the other ones are down, but just not as much. But basically the story, and I've written about this elsewhere, is that the central banks are killing the commercial banks. And very simply, banking is a spread business where they buy money short and they lend it long, and they make the difference between the two rates. That's the spread. So when interest rates have been, the central banks have brought the interest rates down to zero or negative in many, many countries, still positive in the US, but very, very low, basically 5,000-year lows if you look back historically. That just kills the commercial bank businesses. That's the first way. The second way that this really hurts the commercial banks is that the low interest rates keep the zombie firms alive. That's what enables the zombification of these firms, and marginal firms that should go out of business don't, and they stick around and they just suck the margins out of the entire industry, whatever industry they're in, because they're offering the product or service in that industry at a lower price. So it just hurts the margins of the good firms along with the bad. So of course, with the coronavirus, and the fiscal stimulus that came after that, the day of reckoning for a lot of these zombie firms has been put off, but I think we're getting much closer to that day. And even though the central bank in the U.S. has been buying, junk bonds and things like that, it doesn't matter. That doesn't address insolvency for those firms. So, as I've written about, you could have this bizarro situation where, you know, a firm's bonds are trading at par when it goes bankrupt. And then, of course, there's going to be a step function where that bond then is trading at 20 cents. You just wouldn't, what you're going to have is you won't have that step down that you would have normally had without the intervention where that bond, was traded at 90 cents, 80 cents, 60, 50, before it went bankrupt. You're just going to have that discontinuous jump from, par or something close to it to, whatever the valuation is. And that's not going to be pretty. So anyway, those are the two things that are affecting the banks. And then there's one thing that's coming, and I've written about this as well, which is the central bank digital currencies. And these are coming because the banks are kind of bad citizens in that they have gummed up the transmission mechanism for central bank actions to stimulate the economy. And just very simply, they don't pass on that money that they get from the central banks to the rest of the economy in the form of loans. Because they look around and they say, this is a disaster. We're in a serious recession. They don't want to lend to anybody. So they just put that money into their reserves and they don't lend it. And that gums up what the Fed wants to do. So what's coming is central bank digital currencies. I wrote about this a while back. You're starting to see a lot more about this. Also, you're starting to see papers now out from the IMF and the Bank of International Settlements and these huge global institutions. It's coming. And of course, some places already have them, such as China, and I think they have a central bank digital currency in Switzerland. So what that means is all individuals are going to have a bank account, at least in the US. You'll have a bank account with the Federal Reserve. And this is really going to undercut the banks. I think the banks in just say 5 years from now are going to look very different than they do now. And I think a lot of them will probably go away, and be merged into other firms. But it's going to look very different. So I think this is all good for cryptocurrencies. I think this is good for gold. It's good for hard assets because, of course, you're going to get a lot of fiscal stimulus along the way. But at the end of the day, this kind of price action in the banks is a real negative. And it speaks to the underlying rot in the system, which has just gotten worse remarkably since the global financial crisis. All the actions that have been undertaken have basically made the system more fragile instead of making it stronger, which I know is somewhat ironic, but that's where we're at today. Anyway, I hope this was informative, and thank you for watching.